everyone. I'm letting you all trickle in a little before we get started officially. Okay. All right, awesome. We're gonna go ahead and get started with a little bit of an introduction before we really get into the main gist of the webinar. I'm Yusra. I work here at NOCD. I am a creative content strategist and I run all of our social media. So you might be a little bit familiar with my work. But we are excited for this webinar. Just want to let you guys know that it will be recorded and sent out to you, but all in your emails later this week too, if you wanted to take a look at it later on. But the topic of today's webinar is the road to an OCD diagnosis. And having a diagnosis can be a really big step. It can feel scary. It can feel relieving. There's a lot that goes into it. I myself was diagnosed with OCD about 2 years ago. And it brought me a lot of emotions. Like at first, I didn't know how to react. At first, I was still under the impression that, OCD is a cleanliness disorder or a neat freak disorder, and it obviously is not. But getting that diagnosis really helped me truly understand what I was going through, and get to know what I could do to like help myself get better. So today we are joined by Dierdre, who is an amazing creator, personal trainer, somebody that we work with very often. I'm sure you've seen her all over our socials, and she's going to share a little bit about herself and her story about OCD diagnosis. So we'll give it to you, Dierdre.
Hi, so I'm Dierdre. I also go by D. Yeah, and I've been working with NOCD, I think now for like 2 years. But basically my OCD journey kind of started almost to the date 8 years ago, because this time 8 years ago, I had to drop out of college and I kind of went into like a mental health hospital. I was doing like an outpatient program for a month, and then I went into an inpatient program for a month. And that's kind of when I started just, getting diagnosed with OCD, learning about the proper treatment, learning what OCD actually was. But I've had OCD symptoms since as early as I can remember. Like there is not a time in my life where I did not have symptoms of OCD. The earliest symptom I can remember is we had this dog, Joey, and every single time I pet him, I had to wash my hands. And it got to the point where they were like, raw chaps, they were like bleeding. And I remember it was my mom who said, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. And it was like reassurance for me. And it was almost like, okay, I guess I don't need to do that. And I did continue to do it. And then I think eventually it like fell off into other types of things. And then I started checking. So growing up, I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was in kindergarten. So I think 5 years old, and then re-diagnosed after my OCD diagnosis. But when I was 5 years old, I started like checking a bunch of things. And I would check doors, I would check stoves, I would check locks, I would check under the bed. My dad had to take the rungs from underneath my bed and put it on the floor because I kept on getting into bed and having to go underneath and check it, get into bed and then have, back and forth tons of times. Wasn't sleeping. I had to do these, if we were going to watch a movie before bed, it was just kind of a thing where my parents would be like, go do your checks before bed. You have to get them done before we watch this movie, kind of thing. And so we always just had little things like that, but everybody just assumed that it was my ADHD because I was already a quirky-ish type kid. And my parents, like, God love them, they're like so accepting of me. And they're, like, oh, it's just D. She's just quirky, she'll figure it out. And we didn't really understand that, like, there was so much more to it. I remember not understanding why I was so sad all the time and why I constantly was in this state of like depression. Like when I started entering like middle school, that's when it got like really, really bad. And I started getting a lot of like really intense like suicidal ideation. I would be going down rabbit holes. I'd be watching hours of like these YouTube videos of like really like dark things on YouTube. I started self-harming and I had a really, really good childhood. So I didn't know why. I just knew that I couldn't get happy. I couldn't get relief. And I felt the best way I found to describe what my OCD felt like, especially towards the end, was I felt like I was almost like it was the equivalent of feeling like I was constantly on the lookout for someone trying to murder me, because I that's how like alert and like fidgety and scared I was, and how, my anxiety tolerance was zero. If I saw something dark, it could send me into a spiral. If I stepped on a crack, that could send me into a panic attack. It was things like that that just got so intense. um so I got to the point where I didn't get misdiagnosed, but I had a therapist tell me, oh, do you think you have bipolar? And I latched onto that. I was like, yes, 100%, 100%. Yes, that makes sense, because I fit a lot of those symptoms. And so I just kind of carried on for, good 2 years thinking I had bipolar. And then I ended up having to drop out of college. And then my mom kind of got me set up with this, with the mental hospital type place. And when I was there, they told me that I had OCD. I just had to get a diagnosis. And I was like, yeah, I probably do have like a bit of OCD, but I have something so much worse, because in my head, OCD was just a cleaning disorder. So I got the diagnosis. They literally told me, they're like, okay, yep, you have OCD. I'm like, and what else? They're like, nope, that's it, just OCD. I'm like, nope, that's incorrect. I don't just have OCD. There's absolutely no way I'm being taken down right now by a cleaning disorder. You are completely wrong. And I had so much anger, because I just didn't understand. I was like, I have something so much more like serious than that. Very quickly though, they were explaining to me what OCD actually was, and that it was like ranked top 10 like most debilitating disorders, mental or physical, in the whole world. And I was like, you're okay. I didn't understand that. And when I started actually learning about OCD and what it caused and what it can cause your body and brain and mind to do, and like the places that it can go, then I started realizing, oh my God, okay, this is not the disorder I was literally told about my entire life. This is completely different. Basically, none of the things I thought are this disorder. And it made me feel a lot more at peace. And then I started realizing that I genuinely identify with just basically all of these symptoms. And I didn't realize either that I had different subtypes all growing up. My main one is like scrupulosity OCD. I I couldn't get over the fact that it was like a common symptom that people with OCD thought that they were like the worst, most terrible, immoral person ever. I just thought one day, I'm like, I'm gonna snap and I'm just gonna go crazy, or I'm gonna date the wrong person, I'm gonna become evil, or I'm gonna, be put in this situation. If I was put in this situation, I know that I would be like a horrible person. And I just knew at my core I was evil. And then when I went to this hospital where a bunch of people had OCD, they're like, oh no, that's normal. I'm like, you're joking. I'm like, I've been panicking about this for years. But then yeah, a bunch of other things with, scrupulosity. Like anytime I walk by a church, I of course like blasphemy is just going in my head. I'm like, well, there we go. I'm done for. Like, see you never. So just a bunch of those types of things. Every single aspect of my life was completely dictated and controlled by OCD. I really struggled like making and keeping friends. I really struggled. Yeah, there was not, I wouldn't wish it, like, I know this is such a cheesy thing to say, but I literally would not wish it on my worst enemy. It's the most awful thing. And you can't really describe it to somebody, I feel like, who hasn't gone through it, but which has been, it could be upsetting, obviously. But yeah, I think that's mainly it. Oh, sorry, for exposure therapy and stuff. I went like how basically I got to the point where I am now. I'm 8 years into exposure therapy. So when I started learning about exposure therapy, I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, you literally could not pay me $1 million to do that. But then I started wrapping my brain around it, and I started, doing a few exposures, and I like, I was okay. And then I kept on going into it a bit more. And then I threw myself completely into it. And I, like, every single aspect of my life I tried to utilize as didn't do an exposure. Anytime I had anxiety, I was like, okay, what if I go towards that instead of try to run away from it and try to push towards it? So anytime I got anxiety, I would try to use the anxiety instead of being a victim of it. I would be like, okay, how can I use this to be productive? And typically it would always be, I would have to do an exposure, because I would have magical thinking, and it's like, if you cross this bridge, you're going to die. I'm like, okay, so, and I'm anxious. And it's like, okay, I'm anxious. What thought did I just have? Okay, I have to cross the bridge. So I would cross the bridge, and maybe I'd cross it a few times, or I'd cross it every day, that I was there, until like my anxiety subsided. And I would purposely push myself in like those areas. To this day, I've been keeping up with that for 8 years. And like, even just if I'm downstairs and there's a cup that I have like a little dark like thing on it, I'm like, oh, I can't drink that because darkness will go inside of me and I'll become evil or whatever my thought process is. I'll purposely then drink like 3 glasses of water and just be okay, or I'll fill it up again and I'll bring it in my room and can emotionally contaminate my room. So I'll purposely put myself in situations to make myself uncomfortable. So my tolerance is a lot higher. And so now I'm at the point where I could barely leave my house without having a panic attack. And I've moved countries twice. I did a solo trip in Scotland a few weeks ago, which I cried. Thank you. Thank you. But it was a really tough like trip in the beginning because my OCD always flares up when I'm traveling. But I kept on reminding myself, I'm like, this is the exact reason why I'm doing this, because the beginning of the trip was horrific, horrible. And then the end of the trip, I literally, it was the best trip of my life. So it just showed me, I'm like, okay, anxiety does not mean something bad's going to happen. It just means that it's like you're just going outside of your bubble. So that was really, it was really empowering. And I've found exposure therapy now, doing it 8 years on, to be incredibly empowering. But yeah, that's a bit of my story.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like there's a lot of parts of it that so many people can probably relate to. And kind of like you mentioned, I think one of the not coolest things, but something that I do appreciate, like within the OCD community, is that you realize that you are not alone. Like the craziest thing you could possibly think of, somebody else has thought it too, and it makes you feel so much less like insane or whatever you're thinking before you understand what it is. So hopefully a lot of people can relate to that. I think they will. I did want to ask you, what was it like talking with your family and friends about your OCD diagnosis after you got it?
Yeah. So my parents were so supportive. Like they've always just wanted the best for me. And they actually did, research on it and they dove into it as much as I did. Um, my friends that I have had since I was, 5, I also told them, and a lot of people, family, friends, and everything, everybody was like, this makes sense. There was something going on, and we're glad she's figured out kind of what it was. And then when I was moving, I didn't tell anybody and I would never share it and I would never open up about it. And it wasn't until I started my Instagram, I started talking about, like eating disorders and, anxiety, depression, but I never mentioned OCD because I was so ashamed of it. And it got to the point where I think I posted something on TikTok a few years ago, like 2020 time, and it just kind of blew up, and it made me realize that I was very much not alone with the symptoms, and a lot of people have it, and a lot more people than I think.
Yeah.
And the more I started opening up about it, the more people started coming up to me and being like, I think I have this. I've had really close friends tell me I wouldn't have known I had OCD if it wasn't for you and stuff like that. So the more open I have been, the more I personally have only kind of gotten acceptance, because if you think about it, everybody in their life has gone through something hard. They have dealt with some
Mhm.
sort of mental health issue, and if they haven't, God bless. That's so great for you. But typically most of the people that I'm around, it's brought me closer to them, I'd say, which has been really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Is there anything that you wish you had known earlier about seeking a diagnosis, going through ERP, or just like any advice you would give someone as to why getting a diagnosis can be helpful if they're scared even?
Yes, yeah. So I was pretty scared to get a diagnosis because I feel like and a lot of people I know are, because it seems so final and it officially means that, something is not like, well, wrong, if you will. Something is wrong and you can't hide from it or escape from it anymore, and you have to face it head on, and you can't just, ignore it and stuff, because I had tried to ignore it and push it away for years, and it just realized it wasn't going away. And so how wait, sorry, what was the question?
It's okay. I kind of asked you like three questions in one, but I was just wondering, like, do you have any like advice or anything you wish you knew before you got into like getting a diagnosis, going through ERP, and then separately, what would you tell somebody that's scared of taking that first step?
Yeah, so the main one, funny enough, was reassurance. I had no idea. I wish I knew about reassurance before I got diagnosed with OCD, because the amount of times I would ask people to do things for me, or like choose things for me, or make a decision for me, I had no idea that that was only making my symptoms worse. I also wish that I really wish that people knew that once you get diagnosed, like to get a diagnosis is so important, especially if it's OCD, because if you go to a therapist that's not specialized in OCD, it can make it worse. So when I was in a really toxic relationship almost 3 years ago now, and I went to therapy after, and I just got a regular therapist because it was mostly for, relationship stuff. And then my OCD had gotten so, I basically relapsed during that time, and it had gotten so bad again. And when I started bringing up OCD things, immediately she was giving me compulsions to cancel out my other compulsions. And I remember thinking, if I didn't know all that I know about OCD, I would be following this advice, and it would only be hurting me. It would only be making my symptoms a lot worse. And she told me that she's treated so many people with OCD. And it actually scared me, and it made me really sad, because what did she say? She goes, every time you think a negative thought, just wipe the slate clean and throw it away. I'm like, if that worked, like if
Yeah, like I wish.
I would be doing that all the time if that's the case. But so that would be my number one thing that I wish I knew, is getting a diagnosis is so important, because then you can actually target exactly what you need to target, and you're not just kind of trying to figure it out. It's not like anxiety where it's broad, and you can do a bunch of different therapies for it. For OCD, it's so specific what you need to do. And I would say I read a book, but one book specifically, before entering doing exposure therapy, because exposure therapy was the
Mhm.
scariest thing in the entire world for me. Once I heard what it was, I was like, I'm not doing that. And then I read, it was called, what was the book called? The Imp of the Mind. And I read that, and it kind of got me to wrap my head around it, and where I didn't want to be later on in life. I wanted to get these things done now, so my life could be easier down the line. And yeah, so that I wrap my head around exposure therapy, and I wish that I had looked up more people who had done it and who had come out the other side, but I never did that. That's something that I wish that I had found more people who had experienced what I had gone through. And I just didn't realize that there was any.
Yeah. And also, like, yeah, exposure and response prevention therapy, it can seem scary and it is intense. Like, that's not a lie. But I think what I'm getting from what you're saying, and what a lot of other people I've spoken to say, is it's not scarier than like continuing to live with OCD, because whether you do ERP or not, like you're gonna have these thoughts, and these thoughts are terrifying. What ERP does is it gives you a way to cope with them, to deal with them in a healthy manner that actually works and isn't just temporary, you know? So it can be terrifying, but it's not scarier than what you've already gone through. It's only going to help.
It was actually insane to me how quickly I noticed ERP working when I started using it in every single element of my life, not just in the hour of therapy. When I started doing it, whenever I had a thought, or whenever I had an urge to do a compulsion or a thought or whatever, I started getting better. So it's the type of therapy that you get out it almost exactly what you put in, and if you put in a lot, you're going to get out and notice a lot very, very quickly. I've found I always say that exposure therapy, it didn't, give me my life back. It gave me a life, like, period. Because
Yeah.
looking before, like, I feel like my life didn't truly start until I started exposure therapy, because everything, it tried to ruin every single moment for me. And it got to the point where it's like I can either do something really hard right now and make it really like intensely hard now, or I can suffer for basically the rest of my life. And to me, it was a no-brainer of I'm gonna do the hard thing now, so I don't have to, do it my entire life, or deal with all the intrusive thoughts and the horrificness that is OCD for my whole life.
Yeah, 100%. And that's really why I think getting a diagnosis is so helpful and important. I know it can be scary to have like a label attached to yourself, especially OCD or another mental health condition that can seem so scary. But I kind of like to think of it as less of a label and more of just this is something you're going through, right? Because we're all going through something, like you said earlier, Dee, like everyone is going through something bad usually at some point in their life. This is just something you're going through, but having that diagnosis is like, okay, this is what you're going through. Now it opens you up to so many more things that can actually help you, like specialized treatment, the right therapist. It won't push you back in any way. It'll only help you get better. And you can do that at your own pace, like Dee was saying. Like you get out of it what you put in. And if you're not ready to like dive deep into your biggest fears or obsessions, you do not have to. Like you can go as slow as you want, as fast as you want. And that's kind of the beauty of ERP in a sense, where it's very self-guided and your therapist is only there to push you to the extent that you want to be pushed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. With
It's
that, I go ahead.
oh no, no, go for it, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think, Dee, if you're down, we're ready to like take on some questions from the chat. Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so the first question we have is what are some days in which you have dealt with magical thinking? This is one of the things that I struggle with the most, and I would really appreciate some tips and tricks.
Yeah, so that I would say is my main one. I have magical thinking and it's typically like scrupulosity like based, if you don't or, religious based, it's like or, death based. It's typically one of those three. So, I found it the one that's kind of the most you can utilize ERP the most. So whenever you think if okay, if I don't do this, then this will happen, that's your cue to do the exact opposite of what your brain is telling you to do. So what's really really helped me is once again anytime I get that little like anxiety has now been a warning sign for me, not in the warning of something bad's going to happen, but as a warning of okay, this is the moment, this is when we can kind of I don't know how to explain it. This is when we can, yeah, utilize this to make ourselves stronger, make our bubble bigger, and especially the little things. Because magical thinking can be something as simple as if you don't put this cup in the dishwasher on the top of the dishwasher instead of on the bottom one, like your whole family is going to die. So something like that, that little quick thought is the perfect opportunity to do what like give yourself a little bit of anxiety because it might not be the biggest exposure, but the little ones add up. And like the little magical thinking, because magical thinking, I don't know about you, but it goes in my head all day every day, or it used to,
Yeah.
not anymore. But every single thing, every single step I took, every single breath, everything I did was magical thinking oriented. And so when I started doing the little things that I could have just done and nobody would have known, nobody would have cared if I put the cup on the bottom thing, but I knew for myself that I need to put it on the top one because it's those little ones that are going to add up to help me do the bigger exposures.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Our next question is, did you take medication? And if so, what did you take? And also, just before we answer that one, I do want to remind everyone that medication is different for everyone individually. So what worked for Dee, if she took medication or not, might not work for you. So just make sure that you don't take this as like an end all be all answer. It's just more so of her personal experience, what you go through, what works best for you has to be determined by your health provider. But go ahead, G.
So when I first was in the hospital, they gave me Prozac and Abilify. And to be honest, it really helped me bravery wise to do the exposures because I was in a state beforehand where I couldn't even like wash my hands or take care of myself before the medication, kind of was in my system. But that I always say that medication is like used to help me and it didn't fix my OCD, but it definitely helped, suppress my anxiety a bit to make my exposure. Oh my God, I can't speak. Sorry, I'm a little jet lagged, guys. But it's to help my exposures, like help me do my exposures. There we go. There are words. But then I had to come off of it because it didn't really feel right. And I kind of had like a bad experience with it because I felt like it numbed me too much. So then I stopped going on medication and then I got back on it a few years ago. It's called bupropion. And I did it specifically because I didn't want binge eating side effects because the other one had given me binge eating side effects and I had a binge eating disorder for 10 years. So that I just couldn't trade one disorder for another again. So I really wanted to make sure. And that one apparently doesn't have as many. So I took bupropion and I was on that literally up until like last month. And I had been on that for 4.5 years. But I recently have gotten to the point where I've just come off of it very slowly. But yeah, that one helped me a lot for just once again to do my exposures. I utilize medicine strictly to help make me braver. That's what I view medicine as.
Yeah, and a lot of people with OCD, when they do take medicine, it's in conjunction with ERP therapy because, like Dee was saying, it can help some people just like feel more comfortable doing those exposures and getting themselves out there. It's usually not like a standalone thing for OCD. Like it does not cure OCD, but it can certainly help if it's right for you. All right. Our next question is, what do you wish your parents knew about your OCD when you were a kid or a teen? Even though they were supportive, was there something they didn't realize?
Um, I mean, the thing is the things that they didn't realize, I also didn't realize. So the only thing funny enough, and this probably won't be helpful. I remember the only thing kind of being resentful about is that I couldn't sleep. Like I had basically borderline insomnia, if you will. I had the biggest sleep anxiety, and all I needed was sound in my room, and that just wasn't like I was like, can you just leave the TV on downstairs, something, because I cannot fall asleep. And that's the main thing, funny enough, that I think that would have saved me a lot of night problems, and actually being able to somewhat fall asleep and have probably a better attitude the next day is if I had some sort of sound, in my room and it wasn't just dead silence. But for the most part, I kind of learned everything else with them. And, I wish that there were, yeah, but the thing is like, there's nothing that I could say that I wish that they knew because I also wouldn't have known. We really did kind of grow and learn together.
Yeah, 100%. I can also kind of pop in with that one. I think something that I wish my parents knew was that OCD and anxiety are very different. Like, yes, they can overlap, and yes, there is a lot of anxiety in within OCD. But I think sometimes my parents kind of thought that, oh, like I'm just like overthinking because I'm anxious, and oh, just stop overthinking or don't worry about this. And I know that's a little stereotypical, but I think the deeper understanding of I that you can't just stop overthinking, and that it's not just based on anxiety. Like the reason you're having anxiety is because of your intrusive thoughts would have been a little helpful. But like Dee is saying, it's so hard to expect something of your parents when you also didn't necessarily know 100% like what was going on. Like my parents grew with me as well. Um, okay. Next question for you, D, is how do you design your exposures? As I understand, there are different themes of OCD. Like when you're doing them on your own, like how do you kind of go about it?
Yeah. So my exposures back in the day would be different than my exposures now. So back in the day, because I had scrupulosity, and a huge thing was I had a big fear of God. And because I was told during, like, it was a Sunday school, but it's on Monday for when if you're like Catholic and stuff like that. And basically one of those teachers told me that if I didn't do my homework, that I would become possessed. And like I didn't believe the homework part, but I truly thought that I could become possessed. And so from there, I just kind of went into more religious oriented type themes, and just think of like the scariest thing that you can possibly think of, and then over the next 10 years make it even worse. Like every single time that you think of something scarier and scarier and scarier, you just make it worse and worse and worse. So basically what I did when I was in the hospital, like I watched The Exorcist. That was didn't really like that, but I did it, and I watched it in my bed on purpose to emotionally contaminate my bed. um then I would do things like, I'd have to swear at God. And I remember a huge thing for me, I refused to do it at first, and my doctor at the time, or my therapist at the time, my parents were in the room because it was like kind of the first meeting, if you will. And he goes, well, if you had to swear at your mom, like if you had to say, like swear, like use a swear word to your mom, like, do you think that she would forgive you? And I was like, yeah. And he asked my mom, and she goes, of course I would. And he goes, okay, well, if God's all knowing, all loving, all these things that you think, then is your mom better than God? And does he not want you to get better? If he knew that this would make you better, why wouldn't you do it? So that kind of clicked with me, and I go, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so I started kind of building up that fear. Now my exposures are more so, actually, I had the biggest exposure of my entire life this year, and it was on accident. Basically, I did a trip away with my mom, and she booked the hotel in front of a graveyard. And I'm not good with that, not good with that at all. And I cried the first night big time, but I was like determined to, stick, like obviously follow through. So I spent 2 nights in front of a graveyard, and then I was like, I need to walk through the graveyard as well. I want to do it before we go. I want to walk through, and there ended up being three of them. So we ended up, there was one right across there, one there, and then we went on our walk. There was the third one. I was like, might as well just hit the trifecta. So now I'll like walk in graveyards. I'll do the solo trips. I'll every single time I have magical thinking OCD, I will act on it, and I will do the exact opposite of what it's telling me. Every once in a while I forget, but I always try to give myself grace and try to aim for almost like 80%. And I found that an 80% success rate and not beating myself up for the things that I haven't done has worked very, very well for me.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That is an intense exposure, but you did it. So yay.
We had a great time, and I have a sweater from there and everything too, which I would have never
Oh,
done because that whole place would have been like emotionally contaminated, and I would have never wanted to speak about it again. But I genuinely enjoyed the whole.
oh,
So it was,
that's awesome. Yay. All right. So our next question is, were there any markers in your familial behaviors, grandparents, parents, siblings, etc., that indicated others suffered from similar mental health issues, whether diagnosed officially or not?
so I'm the only one in my family, like immediate or otherwise, that has OCD. So there's not one other person in my family who has OCD, which I've found like is actually really rare, and I didn't realize that. But there's a lot of history of, anxiety, depression, things that like potentially bipolar, things that have been not diagnosed properly. Um, but yeah, so there is definitely a history of that, but none that have OCD, which I've recently found out to be really interesting and strange. So nobody knew like what I was going through, and everybody was learning about it at once, but nobody came forward and was like, I also have those. That's also sounds like me. But yeah, anxiety, depression would have been the main ones. And then yeah, there's a few in my grandparents as well, ADHD, but that's about it. Did your parents or anyone in your family have OCD?
You know what? I think that they do, but they don't know it. In the sense that like once I got diagnosed and explained like what it actually is and how it can be a lot more mental than just physical compulsions, um, my parents and I were like, oh, you know what? Like we that makes sense about why this like certain person in our family acts the way they do. They might have OCD because they have like similar thinking patterns with rumination and thinking something bad is going to happen, even though there's no like reasoning behind it and stuff. So I definitely do see like signs of it in some of my family members. But same with you, like the only official diagnoses are like anxiety and depression.
Yeah, I've literally, it was so weird because I noticed it in other now. Like I was at the airport
Yeah.
or yesterday evening, and I saw a guy just walk back and forth. And I go, I would bet my bottom dollar that that guy has OCD, and my parents will notice it too. My dad was in a restaurant bathroom once, and he came out, he goes, the guy was washing his hands like 7 times. I think he has OCD. Like they're
Yeah.
compulsions and the rituals and the repetition of things. And so I do notice it in people though, but not fortunately not my family members. So
Yeah. Fortunately. Yeah. All right. Our next question is, I am the parent of a 27-year-old who has magical thinking OCD. She believes she is protecting me and her dad from death or injury by doing compulsions. She has been in therapy for 8 years and is still struggling. I told her I was doing the seminar today, and the first thing she noticed was Deirdre's name had the word die in it. I have actually gone as far as trying to be mean to her so she wouldn't love me, so she wouldn't try to save me. What can I do to help her? I send her an OCD mantra twice a day to repeat.
so I literally had that issue with my name as well. I was like, oh, this means that I'm gonna die. But yeah, so my a literal exposure is living with my name. So that's actually so funny. Not funny, but that's interesting that we've had the same kind of thing with my name. But oh wait, sorry, my brain is so jet lagged right now. Can you just repeat the question?
Yeah. Um, I think the gist of the question is that her daughter has magical thinking OCD and she thinks she has to protect her mom and dad from death or injury by doing compulsions. But she's been in therapy for 8 years, still struggling. Um, and like it's affecting them in the sense that she doesn't want to, sorry, it says, I've actually gone as far as trying to be mean to her so she wouldn't love me and she wouldn't try to save me. What can I do to help her? So, like, what can we do to help her with her magical thinking OCD?
So there a few things like come to my mind where, if there's like a reoccurring compulsion, do like being supportive and like maybe doing it with her. And if it's something that, if it's a magical thinking where if this happens, then, someone's gonna die like in 24 hours or something like that, and actually like going through and like keeping up with her throughout that entire kind of exposure might be nice to just have that support, just being like checking in, I'm here, I'm still alive, all of these things. um I'm also trying to think, for I've found that the people who have been in exposure therapy and haven't really found that it's been working for them, it's typically because they're doing their safe exposures, and they're exposures that have given them a little bit of anxiety when they do it, but not the amount that you need to keep pushing forward and keep doing it. Like, you mentally know that that this is manageable for you. If you feel like you can do it, in my opinion, you need to push harder, especially if you're not seeing results. And typically when I say that to people who've been like, I've literally done ERP therapy for the last 5 years and I'm not getting results from it, almost all in every single case, I ask, the exposures that you do, are they repetitive? And do you specifically do exposures that like genuinely scare you and terrify you? And they say no, they always avoid the big ones, or they purposely find, or they only do therapy when during that hour, so kind of trying to, I would say, when you have OCD, living in a state of uncomfortableness for 2 months will give you almost 2 years, in my opinion. If you can just embrace, like, if you can just emotionally contaminate everything. I don't know if she has emotional contamination though, if it's magical thinking, but um the little exposure is kind of what I was talking about earlier as well. If there's a little thing that gives her a little bit of anxiety, trying to do those as much as humanly possible and not skipping over those ones, and then trying to do like one big exposure maybe a week or two, or talking with her therapist about how exactly you can help, or being sitting in the therapy. That would actually have been really helpful, I think, for me, sitting in a therapy session with my parents and talking about exactly what you need to do and what would help me go further in my exposures, and what is something that could be worth like doing that.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny because like I'm 27 and I have magical thinking OCD about protecting my parents or that they're gonna die. Um, and one of my biggest things is like if they don't text me back fast enough, I think that they are like dead. And like it's gone to the point where I've like thought about like driving like over an hour to their house because I'm convinced they're done. Meanwhile, like my dad just forgot his phone and went to the gym and I was like on the other end crying and freaking out and my siblings were totally fine because they're like it's not that long, but so I get it, is what I'm saying. Um, and something that I do with my parents, and I'm not a therapist, so if this teeters on reassurance, I don't think it does though, because it's more so preventative. Something that helps me a lot is if my parents know they're going to be gone for a while or something's happening, like yesterday, this literally happened yesterday. My mom dropped her phone in water and it was on 1% somehow. And she like couldn't charge it because it was like clogged or whatever. So it was going to be dead overnight. And one of my things is like, I'll look at like find my friends and like make sure like everyone is where they need to be, and like if their location isn't updating, I freak out. So my mom, like, she was really smart. She like called me through Alexa and was just like, hey, my phone is dead. I just want you to know that it's going to be dead like overnight. I'm fine, just so you know. And I realized, like, I literally told her, I was like, are you doing that because you think I'm gonna freak out? And she's like, yeah, but I don't want you to freak out. I just want you to know it'll be fine. So I'm probably not gonna talk to you tomorrow until it gets charged like later in the day because she has work, but it'll be fine. And just that, helped me a lot because like today I haven't like even thought about it. Honestly, I'm like, okay, she'll be fine. Like she'll text me when she can. But in a sense, just like letting somebody know about something that you know will happen, like not in the sense of reassurance, like every little thing, but if it's something major that you think that typically affects them, it can be helpful. So just like let them know. Um, yeah. All right. And then, Deirdre, this next question is for you. All right. It says, thank you, Deirdre, for sharing. Your story mirrors somewhat how my wife and I have identified with our daughter's symptoms. She is 14. She was diagnosed with OCD this spring, but the symptoms drastically started manifesting in November of 2023. School avoidance is a huge thing now, as well as isolating herself from her friends. And we have been researching OCD quite a bit. We are also involved with a parent counselor, and she has agreed reluctantly to talk via Zoom with another counselor. The question is, do you think me showing her this recording would help her, or could it scare her before she starts sessions with her counselor, specifically in anxiety and OCD? We want to make sure that we help and continue to support her in the correct way.
See, I think for that, it's almost depending on the person. Like I would ask her what her thoughts are. If she wants to know more about it. I think it could potentially be a good exposure if she is scared to know more about the disorder, but it also I think could get her like bring her a lot of comfort knowing that other people have come out the other side. Because I know for me, when I was in the hospital, I had a therapist literally go, just so you know, it's not curable. And then I just was thinking, well, what am I doing this for then? But what they didn't tell me is that I could get to a point where I'm at now where I don't meet any medical, like the medical criteria to have OCD. Like no one told me that. They didn't tell me that I could move abroad. They didn't tell me that I could, have my own business. They didn't tell me any of these things that I would be able to live a completely normal life with very, very, very minimal symptoms. Like, yes, every once in a while there are flare ups, but if you met me 8 years ago, I'm a completely different person than I was. So, that I think is really important to have some because it's kind of borders, I guess, along reassurance as well, where you know that somebody was okay even though they went through what they were okay even going through what you were about to go through. Like I didn't even have that. I had no role model to tell me that they were actually fine, and I'm better than fine. I would recommend exposure therapy to everyone. I recommend exposure therapy to people who don't have OCD. I'm like, you should be scaring. I'm like, you're not scaring yourself enough. Like that's why you're so scared of everything. But yeah, like I think I would talk to her about it, but I think it could be good to show her this and just as even as an exposure if she was kind of scared of it when she first started therapy, or if she when she first starts therapy. Sorry, I really can't speak today.
Uh, just going off of that, I agree. I feel like this is something like if you ask her if she's ready or like, or just like present it as a resource, be like, hey, like I attended this webinar and I have this, and it's basically like two girls talking about their experience with OCD and their diagnosis. And if you want to watch it, it's here for you. I think it could really help because they talk a lot about their journey and how they got better, stuff like that. I think just presenting it as a resource could be like a good way of not like pushing it, not scaring her, but just like having her know that there's something there for her.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, Next question, what was your experience with medication and how did it affect your OCD? I feel like we kind of answered that in the other medication one. All right. This next question, thanks for sharing. Can you please tell us about a bit about your path to and perhaps some strategies for finding the right therapist?
Sorry, what was the first thing about?
Like how, like what was your path to finding the right therapist and what strategies did you use to make sure they were right for you?
Um, what's funny is I've never actually had a therapist that I've like clicked with, but I've found the most important thing is that they're educated on what they're talking about because I don't think you necessarily have to have the perfect therapist to have them make such a impact on to make them have a positive impact on your life because as long as they know what they're talking about and that they're genuinely educated on whatever disorder that you have, obviously OCD. That's to me has been the most important thing because I've got once again gotten to the point where I do not meet the criteria to have OCD. And that is without having a therapist that I've 100% clicked with. And I think with OCD, sometimes things have to be perfect before you can start, or they have to be perfect in every sense of the word. But sometimes if a therapist isn't necessarily perfect, but they know what they're talking about, that almost would be a good exposure to like take what you can from them, and then if it's not working, then switching to a different one and stuff like that. But if somebody is like, if you're butting heads on like beliefs and stuff, and you think that they're doing more harm than good, that's a different story. But I just don't want people to fall into, but I hear a lot, especially in the OCD community, that people like the therapist says one thing wrong, or says something that doesn't really like that triggers them a bit much, and then you can kind of put that bad vibe and bad energy onto them and not want to talk to them anymore, when in reality I think that's when you need to kind of push through and keep talking to them. But that's just my personal experience with it.
Yeah, awesome. All right, our next question is any advice on how to convince a loved one that has OCD symptoms to be diagnosed with OCD, but they don't think that they have it?
That's a huge symptom of OCD, I think, to not think that you have OCD.
Hmm.
To this day, I'm thinking, I'm like, I've made it up. And then I'm just like, you went to a hospital. I'm like pretty sure you didn't make it up. But it's crazy the what I think the reason why OCD is so debilitating is because it does everything in its power to try to not get you help. To try, it's almost like a what is it called? Something that like latches onto your brain. It's just like, oh, a leech. It's literally a leech, and
Hmm.
it's out of you, and it's telling you everything that you like, that it wants you to know and wants you to hear, to like avoid getting all the help and people trying to help you. It's like warping your brain. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, what was the question? I go off on the tangent.
Uh, no, you're totally fine. It's just how do you convince someone who's showing symptoms of OCD to get that diagnosis when they think they don't have it?
Yeah, well, it doesn't hurt. To me, I would have responded to that is, it doesn't hurt to just get tested then and just see, and because it will do more harm not getting tested than it will good. Because there are some disorders I think that you don't necessarily have to get diagnosed for to get therapy for, but
Hmm.
it's with OCD specifically, because it's such a niche disorder, it is one of the most valuable things that you can have as a diagnosis, so you can actually properly get treated for it.
Yeah. Something that helped me too in my journey with diagnosis is like, and if, again, like I'm not a therapist, this is just like my lived experience, but reading about other people's experiences with OCD, because I just thought that I was an anxious person. I just like I overthink so much. That's anxiety. But then like reading people's like stories, like even on the NOCD community page, there's so many different stories of people talking about their symptoms, things that I had gone through all the time, um, that I didn't know were OCD, but then like seeing other people identify it as OCD can be really helpful sometimes. So I think if there's a way to just present them with like the info of like a community page or like an article somebody's written about what they go through, if they um, feel like a certain sense of like resonating with that, it can help them kind of realize like, oh, okay, like I didn't think I had this, but this is literally what I'm going through, and this person has OCD. It can be a little, it can help like soften the not the blow, but help soften like the approach of being like, okay, maybe I do have this thing because it can be scary. I get it.
And also, just because social media is such a powerful tool, I wish I had it back 8 years ago with the level that we have it now, because you can literally type in your fear and OCD, and thousands of videos
Mhm.
from creators will pop up, and she will definitely start relating to some of those topics that they're talking about. I would say if she has OCD.
Yeah. I also think like it's particularly good on TikTok. Like on TikTok, the content that I get that's specific to me for OCD, or even if you like search like hashtag like OCD or whatever, like you will find things that are very niche and specific, but so relatable. So that's another thing I recommend maybe.
To this day, I find things where I'm like, oh my god, I'm like, I have that, didn't realize I was OCD. Good to
I
know.
know, same. All right. Our next question for you, Dee, is how long did you undergo therapy and what themes of OCD did you experience? And for how long did you experience them before you started therapy? So, what did you experience? Like, what themes you experienced before therapy? And then how long did you go through therapy?
So the themes I started with like kind of cleanliness, so the hand washing, lots of checking, like the checking every single like doors, like I kind of said before bed and kind of just in general. I struggled a lot with health OCD, big time, to the point where I would start feeling ill. Like I convinced myself I had a brain tumor. I convinced myself I had blood cancer. I convinced myself I had every single type of thing under the sun. Um, it was mostly cancer related. I had, you know, death OCD where I thought that people, my friends and family were going to die. But my main one was, as I said before, kind of scrupulosity and religion, moral versus immoral, good versus bad. If I was a good person, how I could be a better person. And I would do things. If I did something nice, my OCD would tell me why I did it actually for selfish reasons. It's like, oh, you actually didn't do that because you were nice. You did that because you thought that you weren't going to get into heaven if you didn't, things like that. And I'm like, oh my God, I am a selfish human being. I can't believe that I, would do that. Or I would find myself doing things for people that I really didn't want to do just because if I didn't, that's a strike against me, kind of thing. Um, so yeah, those would be my main subtypes, I would say. I'm trying to think if I missed any magical thinking, of course. I had an obsession of identity as well. I'm like, am I bi? Am I gay? Am I straight? Like, I don't know what I am, so that was a big one for me. Um, yeah. Sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Okay, so then how long did you experience this before you got therapy?
Oh, 19. So from 19 years. For
Okay.
basically from the moment I had consciousness, like and had memory, I've had symptoms in OCD. So I got diagnosed when I was 19 years old. So it was a really big struggle for me throughout my entire childhood. I was obsessed with death. I was obsessed with just it just went really, really dark. I'd say it hit a point where it was no longer hideable when I was like 12 or 13, though.
Okay. And then how long did you undergo therapy for OCD? Like, are you still in it? Is it something you visit sometimes? Like, how long was that process for you?
Yeah, so I was in it for, I want to say 3 years. I did like intense exposure therapy. I got into my last relationship, my OCD relapsed. I got back into therapy, but it wasn't OCD specific. So then and it wasn't working, obviously, because she was giving me all the wrong information. I
Mhm.
didn't know I didn't know about OCD at that time, so I took it upon myself to just read self-help books about OCD and understanding. I think I read Rewire My OCD Brain. I know I read Rewire My OCD Brain, and that clicked a lot of things for me, which I think that should be talked about in therapy and talked about more with like OCD stuff. And then I just went right back onto my exposures, and I just taught myself because what's great about exposure therapy is that you can do it by yourself as long as you have somebody to guide you in the beginning. Because I remember trying to do exposure therapy back in the day, but not realizing that I was trying to do exposure therapy. And I kind of made my OCD worse by trying to push through because I would use a compulsion to cancel out another compulsion. And I didn't realize that I wasn't actually doing it correctly. So therapy helped me to actually understand exactly what I needed to do to truly not have it be a compulsion that cancels out another compulsion and all of those types of things because it's a bit of a brain game, if you will. But yeah, no, and now I'm not in therapy, but I would go back in a heartbeat if I needed it. A heartbeat.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most beneficial things that you can do, and obviously saved my life.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Our next question for you is, since you're the only one in your family with OCD, how did you build community with others who have OCD? Was it support groups or something else?
So when I was in the hospital, it was like an OCD specific kind of unit. So I always joke where I'm like, it's just kind of funny. The first place I felt normal was a mental hospital, but it was really, really true because I'd never been around people like myself. And the biggest thing I can recommend is kind of whether it's for you or for your kid or for friend family is trying to find an OCD support group, whether that's virtual or in person. In person would be obviously the best, or if you know somebody who has OCD, because and then after that I didn't know anybody who had OCD. I didn't want to talk about OCD. I didn't want to think about it again. I was doing my exposures, but it was something that I was so ashamed of. And it wasn't until I started posting about it on Instagram where I started talking to it about it with more people. And then more people started coming to me and started mentioning things to me. And the more people wanted to like understand it and like see, what type of things were happening there. And like, oh, my cousin has OCD. Oh, this person. Like I've had guys that I've dated, multiple, that have OCD relatives that I now talk to. And I'm not talking to them anymore, but I'm talking to their relatives, so things like that. It's like, that's once again happened multiple times. So the more you talk about it, the more people I think like will gravitate towards you, because like I always say, it's lucky and it's unlucky that OCD is so under stigmatized. Like it doesn't have the reputation as some other mental health disorders. So I've noticed that I can bring it up more casually and people aren't like, what? But people are then curious and I can like kind of go into it more, and it's more easily talked about, I would say, than if you had something else that had more of a serious stereotype. Then it's not fun to have to explain it if you don't want to explain it. That's where it's so horrific, and why people don't get diagnosed is because of the fake stereotype.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, just so everyone knows, we're running out of time, so this is going to be the last question that we take. Um, I wish we could answer all of your questions. Hopefully, we'll do more of these in the future, and you guys can pop back in and we can do more. But for our last question today, I'm going to read it out to you, Dee. All right. Thank you. This has been really interesting. It sounds like you have taken some big personal leaps when you talk about multiple international moves, and that as a personal trainer, your work can be inconsistent or okay, so it's saying as a personal trainer your work can be inconsistent or at least very independent, like you work independently. Have you pursued these things to lean into the discomfort? Are they just passions that you have and you push through the challenge? You put forth a really positive message. Is there sort of light versus darkness and positive thoughts beating out concerns, and sorry, and positive thoughts beating out concerns dynamic? Like, what's the dynamic here? So that's kind of a few questions in one, but I guess we can just start with like with your work and moving and everything. Did you pursue these things to like specifically lean into the discomfort, or are they just passions you had that you pushed through?
So I started off as, a personal trainer, and I started doing like social media marketing at a gym. And then when COVID hit, my OCD kind of started getting, obviously a little bit touchy, if you will. And then I started posting on social media. And then from there, I got certified to be, when I started talking about like my mental. So yeah, so I started the Instagram account. And then I started utilizing it to kind of do exposure therapy with talking about my other disorders first. And then I realized that I could, become a life coach. And so then I became a life coach, which is like, I would say my main thing now. I actually don't really, well, no, I still kind of personal train every once in a while, but the like life coaching, I was like, this is something that can help me continue to kind of be more involved and like help talk about it, and be like more, not a therapist obviously, but um be able to kind of, if so, I have clients who have OCD, and I'm able to kind of relate to them with things, and like, they're not alone with that kind of disorder. So that has given me like a lot of purpose and a lot of help. I would say it's less of an exposure and more of a purpose for why I got certified and have been doing the job that I do. Does my job give me anxiety? Because technically, yes, it could all go away tomorrow. Yes. But at the same time, because I've done exposure therapy so many times, I feel like I'm so uh I don't know if moldable is the right word, but what's the word when you're just adaptable? Adaptable, that's the word I'm looking for. I feel like I'm a lot more adaptable because of exposure therapy. I'm a lot more able to be put in a situation and not have as much anxiety as I think somebody in my life who has never ever had any sort of mental health condition, because they haven't had to go through and push through that uncomfortable feeling to get to the other side. Like I know anxiety for me is just a step towards what I like, another step towards where I want to be and where I want to go. If I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. All right, so that's kind of us wrapping up with the questions. And I just want to thank all of you for joining this webinar. I hope it was informative for you guys. It was definitely a lot of fun for me and Dee to just kind of talk about this, like with a group of people that actually get it and want to learn more. So that was really awesome on our end. And yeah, I just want to remind you guys that there is no shame or harm in seeking out an OCD specialist and getting a diagnosis. It's just a stepping stool to help you guys get to where you need to be. And then There's also, if you want to learn more about this, if you want to like take that step and book a free call and learn about OCD therapy, get matched with a specialist, or just like talk more about the process, the ERP therapy process with somebody, you can book a free 15-minute call. It's been dropped in the chat for you guys, and that call will just help you learn more about the process, learn more about ERP and OCD and how you can help yourselves. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.